Hola. Bienvenidos de nuevo. Welcome for this series of lectures that you know it happens like once in a month. But today I'm going to do the little introduction in Spanish. And maybe a little bit longer than usual. Hoy me hace, la verdad es que mucha ilusión que esté Óscar aquí, Óscar Germade. Nos conocemos ya de hace bastantes años. Empezamos juntos un poco la aventura aquí en Elisava. Creo que él empezó como participando en el máster, en el proyecto, guiando el proyecto de revista a la misma vez que yo empezaba dirigiendo el máster. O sea que digamos que ha sido una historia compartida durante muchos años. Y por un lado, obviamente, el momento que se trasladó, que dejó Barcelona para irse a Madrid, pues fue una lástima, digamos, para el máster, pero a la misma vez yo creo que es alucinante el trabajo que ha hecho, que creo que es parte de lo que vamos a ver hoy en la presentación. Y para mí, más allá, digamos, de la cabecera de Vogue, lo que creo es que vamos a poder ver hoy, si no ya habréis visto, creo que un poquito en la exposición, es que sin ninguna duda yo me atrevo a decir que es el mejor diseñador editorial que tenemos en este país, seguro. Y aparte de eso, que eso no es solo el trabajo de Vogue, eso lo ha demostrado en otros proyectos que ha hecho anteriores en el país y en publicaciones y tal, pero yo creo que lo que es difícil de ver, pero entiendo que hoy lo vamos a apreciar con más calma y también de nuevo en la expo se puede ver un poquito, sobre todo incluso hablando con colegas. Creo que no nos damos cuenta o no apreciamos en la dimensión que tiene el proyecto que ha hecho Óscar en Vogue en estos años, que creo que no hay ningún precedente en la prensa o en las revistas españolas de haber emprendido un proyecto de esa magnitud a nivel de dirección de arte, pero también a nivel de proyecto tipográfico. Y, por supuesto, creo que está a la altura y al nivel de cualquier publicación internacional. Y, aparte de todo eso, hoy yo creo que los de editorial que han podido estar un par de horas con ellos, aunque haya sido para criticar los proyectos de manera constructiva. Pero lo mejor de todo, que no siempre se cumple en la vida, lo mejor de todo es que además de ser un excelente diseñador, es un tipo fantástico y espero que hoy lo podamos ver aquí en la presentación. Y es lo único que diré en inglés, that Óscar, he is a very fine man, so I hope you enjoy his work and himself in the presentation. So please help me welcome Óscar.
Thank you very much for being here. That was such a generous introduction. It's really great to be back here at Elisava. It's been almost 4 years since I was here, so it's like being back home. And what we are going to see here is just like the complement of the exhibition you have in the school. And it talks about what it means being art director of Vogue in Spain, and what's the daily job, and what do we do as head of Vogue. It's an international publication with more than 125 years of history, and in Spain it's a shorter history of. And we started this new direction with and when she was starting this new adventure of imagining Vogue in Spain, art of art direction. The work of the last 4 years. And first thing I try to do when redesigning a magazine, not a magazine from scratch, but something with history, trying to be very conscious of the history of the magazine and what it means in different countries, in different times of history. In the case of Vogue, there is a brilliant inheritance, and it's very interesting and curious that Alexander Lieberman is not such a well-known art director. If you talk with editorial designers, our main reference normally is Alexei Brodovich, which was the art director of Harper's Bazaar. And it's probably the biggest influence of the second part of the 20th century, and then Fabian Baron, etc. There's like a clear line. But in the other side, he studied art in Russia, and then he emigrated to the States. And his influence is huge. Incredible eye to discover new talents. And if you take a look at the archive, but if you take a look at the archive of Vogue, which I've been lucky to have the chance to look at, you can see some brilliant excursions, some brilliant ideas of what is a magazine, and it's as important then as now. It could work perfectly now. He had this kind of weird combination today in between art and design. He was not a pure designer. Design by then was not a professional, something you couldn't study. And you can see this kind of arty, crafty thing on his work. But still, there is this simplicity, this straightforward approach to design, so contemporary. There is something really interesting as well on Alexander Lieberman in this combination of art and design, and this approach to the magazine with collaborators, with artists, with photographers, with illustrators. And it is the fact that his layouts, his approach to layout, and he was not trained on design, it's very contemporary, it's very straightforward, it's very simple, and at the same time very powerful, very strong. And some of the layouts he has created, they are always in our mood board and something we go back regularly. And if I have to define his work, and if I had to reduce his work of, I say it's almost more than 40 years, into a few words, to me is this level of contrast in these pages, and it's something I think it's the key when designing a magazine. How can control the elements to have contrast in the page, not plain, not boring, but interesting, big, small. The simplicity, he always plays with, he used to play with 2 or 3 elements, no more than that. And really elegant use of white space, always very refined, always with sense. He was very straightforward in the approach to stories. He was not ornamental at all. He used one typeface for the magazine, which was quite revolutionary in a time where people ornament the magazines with more typefaces, more details, scripts, etc. And he has an amazing sense of sequence, the sequence inside the page, how you can lay out photography in order to create a story in the page or in the spread, and also how that relates with the whole magazine to create rhythm. I like to think we follow this path in order to make the magazine today. We sometimes fail, we sometimes succeed, but we'll see it now. So when we arrived, it was 2017 in June, so it's 4 years now. The briefing was pretty simple. The editor-in-chief and the CEO of the company said to me, we want to redesign the magazine, but we don't want anyone to notice. And that means that when you are redesigning this kind of magazines, the editors normally are in a position very delicate with your advertisers, people who pays advertising, etc. And also your audience is very used to a certain kind of magazine. The sections, the order of those sections, the typography, the kind of photography. So in a really short history like Vogue in Spain of 30 years, which is not as long as in the States, they wanted to be very carefully of how you change and how you can evolve, but not noticing that we are throwing everything apart and we are starting from scratch. So what we've been doing these 4 years is redesigning the magazine mainly monthly. Instead of redesigning the magazine and going to the streets tomorrow with a brand new design, we implement little changes every month. And if you have a look at the magazine now, it's totally different. But if you look at the magazine 1 month ago, it's almost the same. This was the first cover of Vogue Spain in 1983. And this was the magazine 28 years after. This was a magazine before the editor-in-chief change. If you have a look at Vogue in any edition, they have 27 editions in the world. What surprised me the most, and the first question you ask when you arrive to a place with that history and such a big brand is, where is the brand guidelines? You know, what's the typeface we can use? What's the color palette? What's the art direction? And say, there is nothing. The brand guidelines is basically a PDF of 1 page that says Vogue, and a little disclaimer that say you cannot alter the logo type, and that's all. So on one side, it's pretty scary because you are playing with a huge brand like that, and the other side is fantastic because you can do anything you want. They don't care about the typography you select. In every country is different. In every country, they use different layouts, different formats. The only thing that keeps more or less the same is the logotype. Some of them, they made little adjustments. So my first question was, why never in the history of Vogue, 125 years, they haven't done something that is really like ordinary for us, something we do when we redesign brands, which is creating a typeface for the magazine. Most of the magazine it's text, it's a combination of text, of image, and why never having a typeface for Vogue? So we started creating this typeface for Vogue. Of course, you can get as many typefaces on the market as you want, and they have different character, and they have different personality, etc. But what allows you to have your own typeface, and what allows you to create your own typeface with a type designer, is modulating exactly what you need, what you want for your product. And that's such an amazing opportunity. And having a magazine like this is like the perfect surface to play with that project and to evolve a typeface. So as I see the magazines now, and mainly like mainstream magazines that have a circulation of more than 100,000 issues every month, it's not anymore a magazine. We don't do just a printed magazine. We have a brand in between hands. So having your own typeface also modulates the tone of voice of that brand, not only the magazine. So in this brand, of course, there is the printed magazine, but there is a digital version, there are events. We have more than ever audiovisual products now, movies, fashion films. We have supplements for all the brands. We do merchandising, we have apps, etc. We have a whole range of things. If we can unify that through one single voice, which is one typeface, wouldn't it be fantastic, no? And the market we are aiming to is a market of fashion, beauty, living, culture, and art, in that order of importance. So the first month we arrived, I approached Íñigo Jerez, which is a type designer from here, from Barcelona. He was my teacher at the school. He has a really amazing portfolio on typography. He has done really interesting projects. And this is the briefing I gave him. And basically it was exactly what I was saying to you. Each of these editions have their own typeface, and I need something really bespoke for my magazine, for the magazine. And the main words of this briefing for Íñigo from Exotype is that we are creating a visual identity. It's not only a technical resource for printing and reading. We are creating an identity. So if Íñigo, which is the type designer, is really concerned about how you read a typeface and it has to be perfectly on that rotative and it has to be amazing printed, I'm worried about the visual identity to have my own tone of voice, to have a typeface that solves me the problems from the smallest size to the bigger size. And it has to be expressive, but at the same time, it has to be not too expressive to be able to go out every month for years and not be boring, etc. So that combination of the briefing, Íñigo, which is very rational and synthetic, reduce that to a few words. On one side, we are playing with beauty. This magazine is focused on creating beauty, stories on beauty, beautiful pictures, and that typeface has to be beauty somehow. But in the other hand, at the same time, it has to be functional. We have more than 100,000 issues printed every month on a rotative. It's not very high quality. I don't know if you've gone to one of those printers. On a small size, on bigger size, cheap paper that travels a lot, heat, cold, etc. So that typeface has to be functional, has to be perfectly readable, and at the same time, that beauty has to be somehow romantic. We are selling that fantasy of buying Vogue and creating stories that not necessarily are realistic, but they are something that can excite you, get you interested. And this rational part of the typeface could be combined to something more Spanish somehow. And that's an adjective very tricky in this situation. And it's very hard to modulate what's Spanish, what is not Spanish, and especially on a typeface. If you look at the history of typography in other countries, that line of details of a typeface can be quite easily defined. In Spain, there is not that tradition. So the challenge here is building it up, okay? And sometimes building it up with some cliches, but some cliches that people can recognize. And mainly because we are talking about this header. So the solution is this typeface called Chamberí, which is a neighborhood of Madrid. I don't know if you've been there. It's like a very traditional neighborhood. In Barcelona, it could be Gracia, Eixample. And it's a typeface with a rational axis, which means all the axis is vertical and it's not with different inclinations. It's very consecutive, but with a lot of character, with something really expressive, which is the gesture of the typeface. So if we have a look at the glyphs, we have this very vertical axis, very consistent. In the italics, it's always parallel. Nothing changes. All the letters keeps the same bone, the same structure. But at the same time, here and then, we have this expressive detail, this expressive gesture, that it's what it gives the personality to the typeface. So we assure the texture of the typeface is very rational, very simple, something for reading. And then when the typeface grows, when the typeface needs to be expressive, all these details, they flourish. So since then, we were working with Caslon in the magazine, which is a typeface designed for books, mainly. If you have designed books and magazines, the main difference in books, you have very wide columns, so the typeface is bigger, and there is more room for these details of the typeface. On a magazine, normally you have narrow columns, and in a magazine like this, even especially. You have to fit more information, and the way you read the magazine is more vertical. So all these details of the typeface, like all this proportion, needs to be readjusted and needs to be rethink. If you take a look at this, in this case it's Caslon, but it could be any typeface, similar, transitional, or classic, or antique typeface, and you look at the details and this vintage effect of the typeface, you think of printing this in 7 points on a rotative, you're gonna get lose all these details, and it's gonna lose all this warmth effect we love in books. No? So the first decision was to have these precise endings, so having something really sharp in our magazine. And the second decision was to have more like a magazine proportions, more generous X high, so we can play with the smaller text. And if you look at two proportions together, it could be something like this. So in a regular column, this line of difference is what we gain. It doesn't look like that much, but we are playing here the same size. If we have the same X high, we need to make the other typeface much bigger. So at the end of the day, at the end of the magazine, we are fitting more text in less space so we can have more white space, which is what all designers want. And the texture of this text is something really rational, something that is not asking for having too much importance on the page. So once we have defined the text and this texture, the challenge now was, okay, we have a magazine like Vogue that is devoted to beauty, to fashion, to creativity, etc. We need something more expressive, something people can recognize. We need some special details. So how do you grow this family? This is a detail of the A on the text size and the detail of the A on the bigger size of the type. And you can see how the type grows and it amplifies the contrast, and even the drawing, sorry, I'm gonna stand up. Even the drawing changes in the position of the dots. And that's something that happens on 4 different styles of this family. From the basic one on the left, which is only for text, and it doesn't have many contrast, it's very plain to improve this texture we were talking about, until this super display on the right, which is fully expressive, very thin details, etc. And that grows naturally. The endings go higher, the dots were more important. And the trick or the drawing effect Inigo decided to achieve this family is by changing the connection of these dots in here. If you look at the text and the super display, the way these curves grow and the way they connect with the strokes, it changes the personality of the glyph being the same family. So finally, we have 7 weights with the italics, which are 2 weights, and 4 styles. And we have a family of 55 weights. It looks like a lot. I haven't used some of them yet. We are getting there. But basically, it's a system that allows you to solve everything from captions to huge titles to everything that is in between. And this is more or less how the family looks like. This was a project of 8 months, more or less, 8-9 months of Inigo. And what it was really radical for me, really different in this project is that normally when you ask for a typeface for a project, you make a briefing, you get some sketches, you make the changes, and then they deliver a typeface for you. They give you the typeface and you use it. In this case, we thought, okay, what if we use Vogue, the magazine, as the type proof, the type specimen? So from these 8 or 9 months, 4 of them we use the magazine as a proof, like a test surface. So there are previous versions of the typeface that are actually on the streets and people can read it. And Inu was really happy because it's the only time he can make the adjustments with the final product, which never happens because you never have one product, like one final product to test your product, to your typeface. So we used to have like one weight, we print it, we make all adjustments, and the month after the typeface change it, etc. Until we have this final version divided in 4 styles. Text, which is in between 6 and 12 points, headline in between 12 and 20, display from 24 45, and super display for the biggest size. And finally, we did some little trick with the italic version, which is making it, and this was like a very personal request, like in Vogue, because of the nature of the text, we have a lot of italics, which I never worked with a lot of italics before, and I thought, okay, it's okay to have a really plain text, but I need to have richness in it. So since we have a lot of italics, we are gonna make them somehow special. So they have a different inclination and condensation, so it's a little bit narrower. So when you look at the text, you can identify this kind of little waves, these little modulations, so it's not that plain as a newspaper somehow. Okay. So with all these options, this is how the family looks like at the end. It's been a really interesting process. As I mentioned, I never work in progress at the same time, the type and the product. And it's been like a teamwork, because if you ever work on a newsroom, changing a typeface for editors is like a nightmare. They've been used to use that typeface, so we change it every month for 4 or 5 months. So as I mentioned, we are doing a monthly redesign. Since the first month, we are introducing little changes. So we do the magazine in 2 different speeds. On one side, we have like the magazine going on with your master pages, all the styles, etc. And the other hand, we have documents where we introduce new things, new titles, new adjustments to the text, captions, styles, etc. So every month you can see a little difference. We keep introducing and getting things rid of. This is the wall of the newsroom, and this is for me the main tool for design. I haven't been able to play with this tool for the last year due to the pandemic, but mainly the way we work is that we get every story of the magazine is a different document, so you get like a different briefing for each story. We are producing this story with this photographer, we are doing this, etc. So we get that briefing of that story. We have a design team of 3 people plus me. So we sketch that story, we make some tryouts, and once we decide that's the correct layout for that story, that goes to the newsroom. And when you give that layout to the newsroom, that layout goes to the wall as well. Okay, so the wall is the place where you can see the whole magazine. If you are working in design, there's no way to understand the rhythm, the flow of the magazine. So each page approved goes to the wall, and there's where we move pages from one side to the other. We make new sketches, we change the capital letter, we change the title, etc. And this wall keeps growing during the month until the final day where we replace those papers with the final versions, the versions that go to the printer. Once that page is finished, and these are all approved pages, you get the color proof, and then there is still a final chance to make changes, which is the plotters. Okay. Each page has more or less 12, 13 versions, revisions, changes. So if we are producing a magazine of 220 pages, that's like 20,000 versions, more or less, every month. The magazine is divided in 2 main parts, and we design the magazine regarding these two parts. The first part of the magazine is called the front of the book, and it's basically the part of the magazine that has advertising. From the middle of the magazine to the end, which is called the well, you have no advertising, and you have the fashion stories of 12, 14 pages, 20, whatever. It's like the long stories. At the beginning of the magazine, what you get is this kind of very fast rhythm. All the articles are in between 1, 2, or 4 pages. It's very weird to find an article of more than 4 pages, so it's really quick. So naturally, in the well, there are like these long stories. We have in between 7, 8, 9 stories. So naturally, what that introduces in the design is the way people read the story. At the front of the book, just because being very short stories, the reading of the magazine, the way you read it is very vertical. You have to fit in 1 page or in 2 pages title, text, image, caption, credits, etc. So naturally, if your magazine is vertical, you are going to read vertical. The columns are going to be vertical. On the other hand, when you cross this point of view of the magazine, all the stories are very horizontal. You have long stories, you have a lot of space to develop, and you have to be conscious of how that rhythm. So that's why also this typeface was very important, because it fits in one side and in the other. So the layout adapts to these two realities in different ways, and more or less the result is this kind of combination. On the right side of the screen, you have these well pages, big titles, lots of space, big images, expressiveness, etc. And in the beginning of the magazine, on the left side of the screen, you have to fit all the information. Just to have a notion of what we're talking about, if we are talking of the front of the magazine in a single page, the proportion in between these four main elements, which is photography, text, title, and white space, to me, the ideal situation on a magazine like Vogue would be this: 50% of the magazine has to be the image, 25% plus the title, 10% has to be the text, and more or less the perception on a page of white space should be around 15%. That's not mathematic, we are not measuring it, but that's some kind of taste, mood you get on every page. And we have in between 2,500 and 3,000 glyphs on one of those pages. If the magazine has spreads, so we have 2 pages, the proportion changes a little bit, so we have even more room for the image and a little bit less for the text. And of course, it fits more text. So this rational structure of the text, layout, and magazine, it wouldn't make sense on a magazine like Vogue, on a fashion magazine, without this expressiveness, this gesture, this personality of the type and photography. So every now and then, you find this typography getting bigger, getting more interesting, composed, getting more expressive. And also we have some icons, some sections dividing the magazine, where allows us to create some opening spreads. And this structure or this map we saw before is not that strict. We don't have all the single pages at the beginning and all the expressiveness at the end. We try to keep this balance, and having at the beginning of the magazine this kind of little pills of expressiveness, big type, big photography, and try to keep that balance to make the magazine flow on a really natural way till the half of the magazine where the fashion stories starts. So basically the structure is very simple. This division of the magazine is called the point of view, and it's this kind of page that was only to divide one side of the magazine and the other. So it's the page we used to not use the typeface, the bespoke typeface. We use just this as a plain canvas to say Vogue in different ways, and normally it's related to our issues. Each of our issues of the magazine has an idea. One of them is talking about romanticism, the other one is talking about art, some of them are talking about culture, etc. But the music issue, but we have normally some guideline to create the magazine. And then what it comes is the fashion stories, and this is kind of the funny part, but also the easy part. If you have a typeface like the typeface Inigo designed for us, and this is where all the expressiveness of the typeface flourish, and the combination and the playful thing in between the proportion of the photography and the proportion of the typography works, and you can use the white space, and everything is easier and wonderful. So we have these pages normally as a white canvas. We have some styles, like the introduction of the stories are very strict styles, but then all these 56 weights of the type can use in different ways in these pages, which is like 6 opportunities, 7 on the magazine. And the layout is more diverse, and you can, all the 4 designers that work on the magazine can approach these pages from a more creative point of view. So there is no layout here, it's just the expressing of the type, the glory of photography, etc. We have done all this because the work of the people is like a very structured scheme. So when you get a briefing like any of these stories, what you do is already planning what you're going to do with type, with photography. We never, or we try to never start, you get the magazine or you get all the content and then you start deciding how is the page. We work with editors to define how it's going to be the page before making the photography or writing the article. So I think that's one of the possibilities that gave me being inside the magazine. I've been done magazines for many years, but always from outside. You design the magazine, you go to the newsroom, you say, okay, this is gonna be like that. You stay there for 2 weeks or so, and then everything happens, and then you get called 5 years later to redesign it. The chance of being inside, it's how I think magazines should work, and it's a combination of roles like editor, graphic edition, fashion editor, art director, all working together to see or to draw how it's going to be the page before producing it. And that's something that sounds very logical, but it's something I've never experienced in Spain before. It never happened before, and I think it's fantastic to have this chance to work very closely with fashion editors, with editors, with production teams, etc. And this is the result of working together and imagining how these stories were going to be before producing it. If I select the pages you see here as sometimes as an homage to Alexei Lieberman we saw at the beginning with these sequences. And if you look at the pages now and then, they are like little homages to this history we're talking at the beginning. The final part of this process is the art direction, the creation of images. And I think it's a challenge because you are asked for surprises on every page. On a magazine like this, what people expect is having surprises every page and having new stories, and that's kind of the core identity of Vogue. But I think you need to balance that and to create some identity. So the way we do it is being concerned on how the industry works. In this industry of fashion editorial, there are these 4 key players. On one side, there is the photographer. And as in football players, there are different cachets, different prestige, etc. The same with stylists, models, and magazines. And that combination of 4 elements makes able to produce a story or to not produce it. In other words, if you are a reputed magazine, you are going to get great photographers. If you get the great photographer, you're going to get the great model and the great stylist. if you are a medium magazine, you are going to get medium photographers. You can never get the great photographers, so you can't never get the great model, etc. So it's all combined, and it's kind of the industry cachet. Okay, so your challenge is to increase the level of the magazine, the perception of quality, in order to get even best stylists, photographers, and models. How we reflect that in images is a combination between national and international photographers. I think it's interesting to think of your magazine to the people who is going to read it and work in your industry, in your country, in your region, and a nice combination between analog and digital. And more or less, this would be, for us, the rest of the combination, a mixing between studio and location. Vogue is a magazine that always prefers location. We prefer to shoot there in the street and never in a studio. And the combination makes the magazine, but normally we always prefer location. And we are always into color, better than black and white. So we've been able to work with these national and international photographers like Edu Garcia, Emma Summerton, Nacho Alegre here from Barcelona, Dan Bellew, Anya Holstock, Camila Akrans, Nagi Sakai, Christian McDonald, and always try to create this pool of great collaborators. And it's people that comes back, this is Chema Este, regularly to the magazine. We work with the same teams like every 3-4 months in order to reinforce this idea of identity. If you keep working with same teams regularly and introducing new elements to this team, everything is growing consistently. This is Gianpaolo Sgura, and this is my favorite production with Martin Parr in Benidorm 2 years ago. So, just because we produce 30-some magazines every year, and we are busy in these things, you always get like, I was going to say bored, but not bored of the magazine, but or the typeface, but you need like introducing this kind of this thing of the identity and the being coherent is really good, and I think it makes the magazine good, better. It makes your audience feel at home and feel like identified with your magazine. But at the same time, this is fashion and it goes fast and it changes and there are new things going on all the time. So how we can introduce new elements, but being at home and playing with the same idea of one typeface. So with Inigo, with the type designer, every now and then, that happens every 4-5 months-ish, we decide to create what is called the Chambéry collections. And it's like a one-shot typeface, one weight, one issue, and normally only caps, okay? And it's closely related to the issue we are talking about. If we are talking about nostalgic, that typeface talks specifically about that, and it's like a quickly visual cliche identifier to that thing we are talking about in the magazine. So, for example, this first one called Nostalgia started this way. We were producing this issue on nostalgic, which is a very regular fashion thing, you know, like going back to the 80s, to the 70s, whatever. So I talked to Inigo because we were playing with this typeface. This is Windsor, I think, typeface from title credits of Woody Allen. And I talked to Inigo and say, okay, I think we need to do something like that, more nostalgic, but I would like to have our own version of this. I don't want to throw away all this theory of one typeface, 55 weights, Chambéry, blah, 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 and then having the cover with a different typeface. So what can we do with that? Can we do like a script, like something really bespoke for this issue? So Inigo came back with this idea of new deco, which is in structure very simple, is condensing all the glyphs except the rounded ones, O, G, Q, etc. Okay, so on the left side of the screen we have Chambéry, extra light, and on the right side of the screen we have this nostalgia version. And basically the O is the same and all the other glyphs get condensed. So that was the idea, to create that title, Nostalgia. So we thought, okay, now we have the title, what if we go farther and we do the whole alphabet? So all the magazine can be titled in this magazine, in this typeface. So this is the cover, but then Inyo created all this typeface. And we have this typeface created for a concept, which is nostalgic. We have a weight that combines with other weight of Chambéry, as we saw here. So all the times one of these weights is created, it can be combined with one of the weights of the typeface. So it's easily to combine the two typefaces. And also it includes, because it's just one weight, a series of ligatures of special characters, because it's for titling. And when you are titling in fashion, somehow, it's called magic, you find things like Carly Close with the 2S, this Este of nostalgia, CO, OG, etc. So all of these typeface, they have a set of ligatures that makes it even more special, even more unique. And we have created 4 of these. This is the first one, Nostalgia. This works like this with all these ligatures. I'm just showing you the nice part. And this is how it applies to the magazine. So everything is exactly the same except the titles, where you get this kind of glimpse of nostalgia, etc. Opening spreads, big titles, capital letters. What's more nostalgic than Pamela Anderson? Okay. Here are some capital letters. And basically it's a really simple change on the magazine, because you are only changing the titles and the capital letters. And the rest of the magazine is exactly the same. But your audience, your reader, get this idea of a new magazine, something surprising, something ad hoc. The second of this collection is called Ausencia. And it's very special for me because I was really obsessed with producing a whole issue about La España vacía. How you say it in English? It's like the empty space. It's this thing that has been happening in the past 20, 30 years, where the depopulation of the towns in Spain, of the little towns, with the people going to the big cities like Madrid, Barcelona, Valencia. So there is like 70% of the territory that is full of empty towns, just a few old people living there, and it's something people forgot. And there is an amazing book about this, talking about this. So we thought, okay, what can we do? Normally when you produce this, if you have to shoot on a desert or in a forest, you go to the farthest one, you go to the Caribbean, you go to the Sahara to produce a story. And if you have to shoot a story in a city, you go to Madrid or Barcelona. So we thought, okay, we need to do this kind of homage to these towns. So we are shooting in my town in Galicia, we are shooting in Albacete, we are shooting in all the small towns as possible. So it's kind of delocating the fashion. So we work on this typeface with a really simple concept, which is making this typeface, this Chambéry, empty, like depopulating, getting all the ink out. So if you see the regular super display weight of the magazine is like this, and in this version you just get rid of all the ink, you get all the information out, and you just get the outline. So once again, we have something really unique, something really special, and it talks about the idea, and at the same time it combines exactly with one of the weights of the typeface, so we can play very easily with it. And once again, we have a set of ligatures of combination of letters, which makes it even more funny, playful to work with it. It's very funny because as soon as you explain this thing of the ligatures to the editors, they are always trying to find nice titles with ligatures, you know, like with TX. And the application to the magazine is the same as in the other case. It's only applied to titles and introductions, headers, capital letters. The rest of the magazine keeps the same structure. The third one of this typeface is called Tosca, and it's a very weird moment. It was done during the pandemic. I called Inigo in April. We were all working at home. You couldn't go out for anything except to the supermarket. And we were producing the issue for the month of May without being able to shoot any photography or producing anything. So we were all working at home for the first time. We couldn't do anything and say, okay, maybe this is a good time to do another of these collections. And the idea behind this Tosca is that by then everything was upside down, you know, like things that were for us normal, they weren't normal anymore, and everything was like changed in the order we knew. So we thought a nice idea was inverting or changing the weight of the strokes of the typeface. So what normally is thin on a typeface, the thin stroke, now it's going to be thick. And what was thick is going to be thin. So suddenly it was born this weird effect. This is the regular T on a black super display, and that's the Tosca T. So it's very easy to see how all is inverted with the same proportion. And suddenly things start matching in proportions, weights. So we end up with this really strong, chunky typeface on a really weird time. And we have all these ligatures you're gonna see again, but also we have some alternates to some of these glyphs. I think we have like 3 S's and 4 C's, etc. And even farther away, Inigo made like this kind of really thin letters to be combined with the typeface. So you could combine it with Chambéry, you could combine this Tosca, or you can use these really thin glyphs. So sometimes it's kind of tricky to understand, but sometimes it's really simple if you use it combined in the right way. This is the set of ligatures. And this is how we use it in the magazine. And it's a weird effect because I don't know if it was due to the emotional part of being at home for 2 months or something like that, but it was a typeface that when we presented to the newsroom, it was like weirdly accept. It was like something that you would never expect. We were playing with this really subtle neo-deco theme, really thin details, etc. And suddenly you see this kind of, I wouldn't even know how to classify the typeface if I have, you know, my folders of sans serif. I wouldn't know where to place it. So it's really unexpected, but I don't know, once again, if it was due to the pandemic and how emotional we were, but it's kind of the most appreciated one. That's everyone at Vogue working at home there. And probably is the most punchy one in terms of identity, is the most recognizable one, because is this kind of inverted version of a stroke that makes everything weird but working at the same time. We have some exceptions that we reuse some of these typefaces, but they were one-shot typefaces used only in these issues and never used again. And the last one we produced with Inigo is called Eugenia, and it was like a present to our editor-in-chief, Eugenia Atolente, for almost 3 years and a half, she was asking me to be more girly on my design, more italic, more cursive, and I always rejected. I have this kind of aversion for italics. I mean, if I have to use them, I use them, but it's not something I don't want to make the easy association of Vogue with italics and this kind of cliche of girly typefaces. At this time, I thought, okay, this might be the time, and we were producing this issue on the youthquake, which is this movement of young people between 15 and 25 years making a revolution, creating interesting things, making changes on the society, creating art, fashion, etc. So we play some kind of ironic game here, and instead of creating a contemporary typeface or creating something related to digital and to this world of youthquake, etc., we go back and say, okay, let's create the more classic typeface. Let's go the other way around to play the game to this youthquake, and at the same time, let's make Eugenia happy with one day having this italic. So Inigo created this script, this rational script, I think is how he calls it, which you see, once again, all the strokes are very rational, but then you have all the expressiveness on these endings of the typeface. So it's kind of a chambery. If you look at the bones, it's good, it's almost boring, it's so repetitive, but then when it grows, it's so expressive and all the beauty of the typeface appears. And once again, it combines with one of the weights of the family. And basically, it's a typeface that if you compose it with track at 0, everything has a ligature, everything combines, and everything is naturally vintage and youthquake at the same time. And of course, we have the ligatures, like the double S here below. And as Mark made a really nice introduction of me, and I appreciate it, I have to make a nice introduction of Inigo. This special typeface you see here, he does them in 2 weeks, more or less. And he has his job as well. I mean, he does a lot of work, he does a lot of typefaces, so it's amazing. You give him a briefing or an idea, or you start the dialogue, the conversation with him, you get a sketch 2 or 3 days later, and in 2 weeks you have a typeface. It's really impressive. Do not go and ask him to do a typeface in 2 weeks. He will say no, but he can. And this is this kind of youthquake dash vintage antique magazine of Vogue. This was August past year. And last but not least, and I always prefer to talk about the cover at the end, because I was talking to some of you before, I think the cover needs to be the reflection of the direction of the magazine. And it doesn't have to be another page or a copy of one of the pages, but it has to reflect what you're going to find inside somehow. It has to give you a clue of what is going on inside. This was the first cover we did in this new era of Vogue. This is Patrick de Marchelier, the photographer, and Bella Hadid. And yeah, it's a cover of Vogue. There's no mystery there, okay? So my fight this year, and I think Mark mentioned it before, it's like I never understood why fashion magazines, which they produce the most expensive covers on the market, I mean, half of our budget can go to the cover, needs to occupy all the photography, all that picture with information. Okay? And also, what kind of information you are going to give in this cover? I mean, who is going to be interested in the cover because of pantalón de cuero, plumas, lunares, etc. I mean, if you're making the hugest effort on doing a fashion story, 12, 14 images, if you have analyzed the fashion show runs, if you have selected a trend, if you got a photographer, a model, you spend all your money, you went to Paris, you get 80 images, you reduce it to 14, and then you have to select one for the cover, and you have something that says Vogue, and then you cover the magazine. So that's something that sounds very logical, but it's been the hardest fight all these years to reduce this kind of information. And to say something really simple, we are Vogue and we have one image. We produce fashion stories and we are Vogue. So also, if you Google Vogue cover, you see that's something that happens very commonly. But if you scroll on Google, if you scroll on Instagram, all those titles are even worse. I still don't accept the theory, but that could make sense like 20 years ago. But now that people is consuming the covers online, and that's something we can measure, there's people who is buying the magazine to read and to have the printed object. But mainly our product now is reduced to one cover and is consumed in digital. So why making it dirt? So in this Menos es Más, we've been playing all these 3 years to reduce all these elements on the cover. And it's been like this redesign we were talking in the interior, like monthly adding things and getting rid of things. In the cover has been exactly the same. We have been introducing these changes little by little, so no one noticed it, and we could do it. So in the first cover we had like 6 titles, and by now we have in between 2, 3 sometimes. So it's been reducing elements, making the secondary titles smaller, making the main title bigger, keeping the information focus on image and Vogue, image and Vogue, image and Vogue. And finally we are getting there. We are reducing all these elements and we are paying attention to what's important. It's the image we are offering as the image of the month and that masthead that says Vogue. So all these covers, this is all the one, we are getting rid of elements and mainly focusing on the main theme, Vogue and images. This is very special for us because it's the first illustrated cover in the history of Vogue Spain. If you have a look at the archive of Vogue, in the first years of American Vogue, all the covers were illustrated. And when photography appeared in the magazines, they get rid of illustration, and it never appeared after. And this is the cover of the pandemic, May 2020, and just because we couldn't produce, it was our chance to do finally an illustrated cover. This one is by Ignacy Monreal. And this is one of the final ones we've done. And then we have the supplements. The supplements to me is this kind of weird product nobody's paying too much attention to. So I thought, okay, this is where we can do something nobody is expecting because nobody really cares, because something you don't sell is something you give for free with the magazine. So the main example is this Collections magazine. The Collections supplement, it goes out twice a year and it compilates all the fashion runways of the season. Okay, we take all the fashion runways, we edit it, and we introduce it in the magazine by trends for that season. Okay, so I thought that cover should be something funny, something interesting, something related to color, to the joy of fashion. So we've been creating these illustrations, infographics, new ideas for these covers. Like This is how we save the trends. And it's been a really nice experience designing this. The final one we produced, it was this broadsheet newspaper with this heart during the pandemic as well. And finally, all these thoughts about the cover and how we reduce elements and how we focus on what for me is important, which is the image, and having this brand called Vogue. I like to think it's going like back to the origin, going back to Óscar Germade, and these covers we are producing, I like to think with all the distance that somehow they are closer to the origin of Vogue and these covers we saw before by Alexander Lieberman. Thank you.
¿Quién quiere preguntar a Óscar?
¿Pero cuántas preguntas tiene?
Carlos Enrique castigado, primero no. ¿Alguien más primero? Some questions before Carlos Enrique.
Va a ser Carlos Enrique.
Y después otra, y después otra.
Buenos. A ver, la primera pregunta que tengo es, ¿cómo llegaste cuando estabas hablando de Chamberí Special Edition, por así decirlo, de nostalgia? La primera tipo que mostraste no se parece absolutamente en nada a lo que llegaste.
No.
Pero, ¿y eso no lo explicaste?
No.
Vale.
Porque ahí llegó Íñigo, no llegué yo. Lo expliqué, pero lo expliqué mal. Yo estuve probando tipografías que me diesen ese mood nostálgico y llegué a Windsor, a esa tipografía. Entonces yo hablé con Íñigo y le dije, Íñigo, no me parece bien, después de todo este trabajo de 3 años, de reducir toda una tipografía, ahora en la portada, que es el elemento principal, poner una tipografía de la nada. Entonces, ¿qué te parece si coges nostalgia, estas 6 letras, y en esta línea, que es Windsor, haces tú una versión de portada solo con esas 6 letras? Entonces él me dijo, de hecho me devolvió una versión de nostalgia de Windsor, pero dijo, yo creo que es mejor que la hagamos de cero. Y entonces él me propuso hacer nostalgia, esa que vimos, no la tipografía entera, solo la palabra nostalgia, con una versión de Chamberí neodeco. O sea, fue una propuesta de él. Y a partir de ahí ya nació el alfabeto.
Vale, muy bonito. Muy bonito.
¿La respuesta o la tipografía?
No, la tipografía, la respuesta también, pero la tipografía sobre todo. Okay. So, I wanted to know about American Vogue and how much control, is Vogue Spain, how do you say, published by Condé Nast as well?
Yeah.
So, and how many fingers do they have in your threads, I guess?
Condé Nast has 2 ways of proceeding with Vogue. One of the ways is having editions. We are 1 edition, and the other option is having a franchise. Okay. We have how would I call it, like a network with all the editions and franchises of the world. So we have access before they are published to all the content of all the editions, and they get access to our editions. So we can get stories from them, they get the stories for us, so that's called syndication. So we share some content, and we have like a percentage of content we should share, and it's around 15-20%. The 80% of which is not syndicated, it's totally free, and we have by now, in May, we have no control of any American Vogue or anything.
But like whenever you guys decided to like completely redesign everything and do an entire typeface, they were like, go for it. Awesome.
We didn't ask anyone.
You didn't, and have they asked for the typefaces?
Sorry.
Can we have them?
No.
No. Have you ever met Anna Wintour?
Yes.
Nice. Thank you.
So he did 2 questions just to ask that. Yes.
I saw Grace Coddington once.
Congratulations. Anna Wintour came to the office before the pandemic. She paid us a visit. Yeah. Without sunglasses.
¿Más preguntas? Any questions? Don't be shy.
Es una pregunta como sobre de posibilidades. O sea, ¿es posible hacer una portada sin fotografía? O sea, porque estabas hablando de que el texto ensuciaba la fotografía, pero tal vez podrías quitar la fotografía y solo dejar el texto. Ya, es mi pregunta.
En la edición de Vogue, es decir, sin ser un suplemento a la revista, está prohibido.
Okay.
De hecho, pocas veces pasa, pero hay como ciertas normas que no están escritas, pero sí están establecidas, como que las portadas son a color. Rara vez nos las saltamos. En 4 años hemos hecho 2 en blanco y negro. O sea, en 48 números 2. La modelo siempre mira a cámara. Solo hay una que no mira a cámara. Y nunca sale un hombre, a no ser que salga con una mujer. Excepto American Vogue con Harry Styles, que estaba César seguro que deseando comentarla. Es decir, son excepciones muy raras. La de quitar la fotografía no existe, y de hecho la curiosidad de esta portada, perdón, estoy llegando, es que la versión original, y por la que peleé y perdí, como podéis ver, era sin esas 2 siluetas arriba. Pero bueno, a veces se pierde. Ya que me dejasen poner unas carpetas de Mac en la portada, me pareció que la batalla estaba ganada.
Gracias.
A ver, esto es una estructura bastante sencilla. Hay un director de arte y director de moda, luego hay una editora en jefe y luego hay un CEO o una CEO. Entonces, yo planteo la portada, la veo con la editora en jefe, nos gusta esto, a veces peleo con ella, yo quiero esto, yo esto, yo esto, yo esto, y eso se presenta a esa persona que tiene que aprobarlo. Es un proceso sencillo, pero como te imaginas, pues el poder está en el último paso, no en el primero. Tuve que poner 2 siluetas, pero bueno. ¿Más?
My Spanish is not super good, so maybe you already answered that just right now, but how can we imagine the process? Like, who comes up with the topic of the issue, and like how is that done?
Yeah, we do a monthly meeting. We do a season meeting where we see all the trends of the season. That happens twice a year. And then every month we have a meeting with all the newsroom where we define the subject of the issue. And then 1 week later, 2 weeks later, everyone comes up with ideas for that issue. So, for example, we have an issue on art because all the season on fashion talks about art. So we are going to do an issue about art. So we go to a meeting, and if you are an editor, you have many ideas for the magazine. If you work on production, you can go with ideas. I go with ideas. That's like something very natural, and everyone goes with ideas to these meetings. And sometimes in some special issues, you can create like a special concept. So if you have the idea of creating an issue of the empty Spain, you know, these people emigrating to the cities, and you create a whole issue about that, that is not related to the fashion season, but that's something you came up with idea, you go to the editor-in-chief, and we meet all together, and everyone goes with their ideas for that. But it's something really easy.
Okay, wow, nice. And how is it then decided? Is it like a democratic voting, or? Sorry, maybe it's a stupid question.
There is a reason to have an editor-in-chief.
Yeah, okay.
Someone has to decide.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Hi. Just when you mentioned about like analyzing the trends and stuff from, I'm not sure, did you say it was the previous seasons, or how is it that you identify the trends? And is there a possibility to, I mean, is that a responsive thing that you're like responding to trends and publishing it, or is there the opportunity to like set trends?
If I understood well, we analyze the trends on fashion, not the trends on graphic design or art direction.
Yeah, of course.
So we see the fashion runways, we analyze the trends, and we decide, mainly the fashion editors, of course, whose are those trends we are going to talk about the next 6 months. With that, we define what these issues are going to talk about. In my side, we avoid following that because we would be changing the magazine every 2 months or something, but radically. You know, if the trend now is neo-romantic, we cannot adapt, or we shouldn't. I think there are other platforms to do that, like digital, videos, audiovisual, etc., which is more easy and logical to be more flexible. This has to be an identity that grows month after month.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, and a follow-up question. How does that relate to the person that's going to be portrayed on the cover, or who you invite to be on the cover? Is it something that come to you from the outside, or is it something that you search for based on these trends and fashion icons that you have been studying?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Sure. So, can you hear me?
Yeah, I missed the first part.
Oh, so the people that go on the front cover.
You mean the model or the
model
talent?
Or yeah, exactly. Is it something that usually is more given to you, as in like requests from outside, or is it something that you search for proactively?
I would say there are 3 ways to do it. The first one is when you want a certain model or talent, so you go after it by PR agencies, brands, etc. There are certain ways to get to those talents or models. Normally something we decide. We get offer models and talents every week, and sometimes we accept them, but normally something we discard. It happens once or twice a year. And once a year or twice a year, it's something that is like combined with a brand. If Alicia Vikander is the image of Louis Vuitton, and that month we decide the credit is Louis Vuitton, it makes sense that we make everything match. So, but mainly we go after the models and talents. There are lots of things, of course, because we don't have time that I didn't explain here, but we always try to keep a balance, which is not easy because getting a model or getting a photographer is not getting up the phone and hire someone. You know, it's like a process, and normally it's a process where you manage 8 to 9 different options, and something works, something goes to other month. The cover you had to a month, it goes in now. But we try to keep a balance in between diversity, models, talent, and not being repetitive. And it's hard to manage. So we try to decide ourselves what we are going for, but sometimes it's not possible. And you get offer. Normally, they offer you talent. It fits.
And does that translate to the diversity that, have you been searching for that diversity into having more people of color and other types of people into it? Or is it something that naturally changed with the industry, or is it something that you had to go for because you wanted it to? You know, I wanted to understand if it's something that has been coming or is something that you looked for.
I'm proud to say that, especially with the force Eugenia put on it, we were looking for that diversity from the first moment, and not as a response to the industry that has been forced to change, because sometimes it feels like they didn't want to change, really. It's like they've been forced to. And that's something that is in our guidelines from the day one. We've been looking for diversity in many senses, not only in race or in size, in ages, in culture, in different ways. You have to go back to your reality, and sometimes it's not just possible in a country like this. I mean, if you can accept to some models, some talents, sometimes your voluntary of diversity is reduced to what you can get for that month in that moment. But we've been introducing LGBTI diversity, sizes, race, ages, and not just 1 month, but something like a conversation on each issue, and it's still there and it's still happening.
Thank you.
Thanks to you. César, ¿se te han acabado las preguntas?
Hola, otra vez.
Hola.
La decisión de que Chamberí fuera puesta para retail fue por presupuesto, fue porque Íñigo fue apuesta para venta en retail y que no sea solo para ustedes. ¿Es por un tema de presupuesto o porque Íñigo lo quiso así, o solo quiero saber la decisión?
Sí, es algo que negocias cuando la encargas. Tú puedes pedirla en exclusiva, que es más cara. Puedes venderla desde el día 1 o puedes tenerla en exclusiva 2 años que tuvimos nosotros. Yo pensé que lo interesante era tenerla cuando sales. 2 años después, cuantas más se vendan mejor. Al contrario, o sea, ojalá. Me sorprende que no la tengan en periódicos y en revistas.
¿Y hay plan de sacarlas de colecciones o no sabes de esto?
Sí, tenemos 3 o 4 pensadas, bocetadas, brifeadas para algunos números. Hay algunas, es verdad que normalmente nacen del número, también hay algunas ideas que te van ocurriendo. ¿Y si hiciésemos Chamberí pixelada? No sé, me lo invento. Bueno, pues cuando llegue el número ya la haremos. Y luego hay algún número que va a venir que sí que estamos pensando en hacerla. También dependes de... Se hace muy rápido, depende de disponibilidad de Íñigo para esto.
De acuerdo. Gracias.
Creo que ella preguntaba si las vas a poner a
si las vas a poner a venta. Perdona, me he equivocado. Yo le he dicho a Íñigo que debería. Lo que pasa es que, como son tipografías hechas en 2 o 3 semanas, no están acabadas. Es decir, son tipografías que a lo mejor le faltan acentos, falla algún espacio, algún vector se ha ido un poquito, entonces, bueno, le supone trabajo de hacerlo. Yo creo que sería un buen paquete para vender junto, ¿no? Es un paquetito de tipografías para... Pero bueno, lo cierto es, y aquí nos vamos de Vogue y tal, que todas esas tipografías luego tienen muy mala venta. O sea, al final se venden sans serifs geométricas, que es curioso porque tienes todas las del mundo y la gente solo compra eso. Chamberí es una tipografía difícil de vender y ya las colecciones sería más. Las tipografías serif cuestan mucho de vender. Y estas cosas especiales, un día leí un artículo de Chris Sobersby que tiene 3 o 4 así y decía que no vende ni una. Y la National y la Founders, o sea, cada semana licencias y licencias. Entonces yo creo que el esfuerzo que le supone terminarlas para la venta, que es un fine-tuning de muchas horas, quizás no le convenga.
Okay.
A mí me haría ilusión.
Gracias.
Hola, gracias por la charla.
A ti por venir.
¿Vogue tiene alguna iniciativa de intentar trabajar con diseñadores que son más independientes o en menor escala? ¿O el enfoque está siempre en las grandes marcas, Louis Vuitton, etc.
No, va a quedar muy corporativo publicitario, pero nosotros cada año tenemos un concurso que se llama Who's on Next, que básicamente se dedica a buscar talento en marcas jóvenes e independientes, y cada año pues se presentan 50 o 60 marcas y una de esas gana el premio y durante un año se acompaña económicamente, con presencia, y habitualmente cada 3 o 4 meses también hay grandes temas de marcas jóvenes, independientes. Sí, es una combinación y yo creo que también es una realidad, ¿no? Creo que sería estar muy desconectado del mundo solo hacer Chanel, Vuitton, Saint Laurent, etc. Yo creo que hay que jugar en todos los niveles. Pero sí lo hacemos.
Carlos Enrique, ¿la última o qué? ¿Te arrancas?
Es que no quiere ni micrófono.
Es que si no, no lo oyen en casa. No es por la ilusión de darte un micro a ti, que ya sé que la tienes, pero es para que te oigan en casa.
Hice teatro muchos años, así que sé proyectar. El último, bueno, no es una pregunta, más que nada quiero que nos des
No es una pregunta, es una reflexión. Esa es la frase más temida.
Bueno, y eso que no he estado en las otras charlas, porque a veces se pone complicado. Pero quería saber qué consejo nos podrías dar para dejar una marca personal dentro de una marca tan icónica como es Vogue.
¿Cómo?
¿Cómo dejas una marca en algo tan icónico como Vogue? O sea, ¿cómo? Sí, no sé cómo. ¿Cómo
dejar tu sello personal en algo icónico como Vogue?
¿Qué? O sea, yo... La pregunta, César. Carlos.
Enrique, sí. Carlos Enrique.
A ver, es un poco tricky la respuesta, porque en realidad lo que deberías hacer es no dejar marca. Es decir, es mejorar la revista y que salga bien. Pero claro, al final la manera de mejorarla es la más visual. Es lo que la gente recuerda y es lo que deja impronta. Entonces, al final estas portadas más o menos se recuerdan. El cambio tipográfico creo que es lo más recordado de todo el mundo. Es un proyecto que en ese sentido es único aquí porque no se ha hecho. Entonces, yo creo que ese tipo de cosas sí, pero no tengo... Marc me ha invitado y vengo encantado, pero para mí es una excepción. No tengo voluntad de figurar. Al contrario, me da como pavor.
Vale.
Ojalá poder estar más en la sombra. No. O sea, tienes todas las posibilidades para dejar tu sello personal donde quieras. Hay libertad, hay manga ancha, pero yo creo que no es tanto un sello personal como artista, es decir, este es mi gesto, sino el tipo de trabajo que hago, que lo hago aquí en otros sitios. Lo que pasa es que lo adaptas a donde estás trabajando. En este caso es Vogue. Yo sé que no es una revista independiente, yo sé que no es una revista de política. Entonces, el proceso que sigo y la manera de pensar es la misma que aplicaba en el País Semanal, pero adaptado a esto. Y yo creo que eso es lo que tienes que dejar, la manera de trabajar. Pero bueno.
Muchas gracias.
No te han dejado ser el último, ¿eh?
Sorry, it was not the last one. But I wanted to know, like, how the ratio approximately is of content or photography that's exclusively produced for Vogue and, I don't know, pictures you get from the person that you interview or whatever.
That's interesting because when I arrived, I was not conscious of how much graphic editing there is in Vogue. We produce as much content as we can, but still there is like 15% of the magazine that you don't produce, ish, 50%. Okay. Each issue has around in between 600 and 1,000 images, more or less, depending on the issue. We produce 200 and some. and the rest is graphic editing. We have an amazing team of 2 people with a vast culture on photography. They watch all the editions, they know all the history, they know all the archive of Irving Penn by memory. You can ask them, there was a picture of Peter Limber in the 90s with a horse, and say, yeah, Vogue Italy, 94. It's amazing.
Wow.
It's amazing. They are such an amazing team, and I work a lot with them. So, and sometimes it was the other way around, like an editor has an idea, like we are doing a beauty story about food, whatever. So they talk with graphic editors and they agree on 10, 12 pictures, and then they show them to me and we select the final one. So it's not always me talking to them. Sometimes it's the editor just dealing with them, and then we take the final decision. But it's amazing how they work and how many images they manage. And that's on the history, but they manage all the editions. The question before, we have access to the content of the 27 editions, all the content they are producing. So if we want to publish something, we are aware of all the fashion stories, etc., and we can ask them for that content, and sometimes they ask them for us. For example, if you, like a curiosity, if you have a look at Vogue Australia, they publish a lot of content we do. And it's very interesting because we are not like similar markets at all. You could think of Vogue Mexico or something like that, but we have a lot of relation with Vogue Australia. But yeah, 40-50%.
Okay, thank you. And then it's published in the same issue or like the same month, or randomly
Yes,
chosen?
and when you buy or you syndicate an image, you have to specify the month, the issue, and the article you are talking about. So you cannot buy a picture of Bella Hadid to talk about surgery, for example, or to talk about the war in blah, blah, blah. Or sometimes you cannot buy a picture of a model to publish in the interior magazine because that model has the cachet of cover. So they don't sell you the image. Same with photographers. Sometimes they don't allow you to publish their images because they only produce covers.
Okay. And how does it work because, for example, I know a food designer here from Barcelona who got interviewed in Vogue, and she provided the images for the interview, but is there like a guideline on which images you allow and which not, or?
Well, sometimes in these kind of small articles, they send us the images, these graphic editors, and we see these images, and if they fit, we publish them. We rarely publish images provided by other people. Sometimes we produce it, or sometimes we buy them, or sometimes we ask them to do pictures for us, but sometimes it happens. So that's the graphic editors that propose me that, and finally we say, okay, this picture and this picture.
Okay. And you, in person, you say yes to every single picture?
With my pen, yeah.
Wow. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks to you. Has empezado a preguntar y se animan todos.
Yeah, sorry. Just one, I think it's the last, but how organized is your archive on that? Like, do you have like a Google internal, like Google Images? Is everything organized, categorized? And
No, I have nothing. I don't have Pinterest, I don't have Google Images, I don't have mood
but
boards.
like an internal one for Vogue. Like, how is the archive of Vogue organized internally, like digitally? Do you have like a database of all of the...
We have a database divided by issues, articles, graphics, and texts in that order.
Cool. And does it work well, like when you need to...
Very well.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just wanted to know. Thank you.
And Google Drive to transfer files. That was a technical question of the...
No, pero ella se refería si hay como un gran archivo entre todas las ediciones de todos los países que se puede consultar muy bien.
In between the different editions, yes, it's called DAM, D-A-M. So you have USA, you go to USA and you have Vogue, Vanity Fair, GQ, blah, 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 blah. And then you have May, June, July, blah, blah. And then it's like it's like the files on your computer, but with all.
She's from data, so she wants to know if you can do transversal research, not going to what you are looking, to a specific
Yes,
issue,
we have another archive called Monroe's, I think. You can make these transversal searches. It searches in all editions, in different years, so you can navigate in a different way. We have many tools to search basically images, which is what we work with.
Cinco, cuatro.
¿Quieres la última?
No.
2, 1. Thank you, Oscar.
Thank you.